Welcome back, Art World. I am Miss Art World, Catherine, with my co-host, Lisa.
What's up, guys?
So we have a very exciting guest with us. It is artist Michael Pearce. Welcome, Michael.
Hi there.
Did I say your last name right?
Yeah.
It's an easy
Awesome.
one. We've had some complicated last names, and I'm like,
We both get like anxiety. Like, who's gonna do the intro?
So Michael is an artist. You also, we were looking you up, you have your Master's of Fine Art, and you have your PhD. What's your PhD in?
I did my PhD on about as abstruse a topic as you could possibly think of. I went and looked around Neolithic British sacred sites and how you could apply Neolithic principles of art making to modern art, to contemporary art.
Wow.
I told you it was abstruse.
And you also are a professor at Cal Lutheran.
That's right.
How long have you been teaching there?
Oh, goodness, must be 14 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, unbelievably. It feels like I got there last Thursday.
Still learning,
That's incredible. Yeah.
where to go. Where's my classroom? So we invited you to be on the podcast mainly because you're an amazing artist, but you have also are curating a show at Studio Channel Islands Art Center, which is located in Camarillo. Can you talk about what the show is and how it came about and curating? Just all the questions.
Sure. So I've curated many shows. I used to run a gallery at the university, and I stopped doing that a few years ago. But I kind of regretted losing the opportunity to show the art that I think is important and especially relevant to what's going on today in the art world. And so I spoke to Peter Dias, who's the director of the gallery here at Studio Channel Islands, and asked him if he would be interested in me curating a show for him about imaginative realism. Which is a really interesting thing that's going on in the realist art world today. And I thought how wonderful it would be to bring together a whole bunch of artists who are living artists who have created works of art which are not just beautiful and technically well made using old masters' techniques, but also painting things that aren't real, things that are impossible. Like what you used to call fantasy art in the 20th century. I think that's an outdated and slightly pejorative term, so I don't use it. I call it imaginative realism, and so do many people in the art world now, which is interesting. So the show is a really wonderful experience. You're going to see pieces by MacDonald and Regina Jacobson, for example, and Boris Vallejo, giant of fantasy art from the 20th century, Julie Bell, Pamela Wilson. It's a wonderful show. You've got to come and see it.
It's really incredible, and that's actually where we are recording from right now. And these pieces are amazing.
And the show opens next weekend.
Saturday.
Right, on Saturday.
On Saturday, and I believe that's
April 6th.
Yes. From 4 to 6?
Right.
Yes. And we will post all of this information on Instagram and our website as well.
Yes. So where did you find this collection of artists?
Well, some of them I've shown before. Some of them are connected one way or another with the conference that I run, the Representational Art Conference, and I've invited them to come and speak and participate at the conference. And because the theme of the conference is the same world as the show, talking about imaginative realism, it made sense to ask them if they wanted to show work as well. So I did. Roger Dean, for example, is going to speak at the conference, and he's got a couple of his paintings in the show. He's the guy who designed all the Yes album covers. You remember those fantastic, wonderful paintings? Goodness, they're gorgeous, and so cool to have a couple of them in the show. And they're big too. They're 6 feet wide, 4 feet high. It's not like you're looking at a little CD cover thing. They're enormous and really rich to look at. It's a peachy thing to have those in the show. And I mean, for me, I remember having Yes albums when I was 15 and just gazing at the Relaya and looking at these fabulous landscapes and just being smacked over the head by them because they were so wonderful. And to actually meet him and talk to him and show his work is just, I'm like a kid in a candy shop. I might just drool a little bit.
It's awesome to be able to work with those artists that you have admired and get the opportunity to like handle their artwork.
Yeah, it's something else. And you just you don't have these experiences every day. I feel incredibly blessed to be able to meet these folks because they're so cool. It's so interesting. Roger hates the term fantasy art. You can't say fantasy art around him. He takes it as a personal insult.
Wow.
Well, it ties
Noted.
in, right? But it ties in with 20th century thinking. You know, if you had shown Clement Greenberg these paintings, he would have laughed because he was all over abstract expressionism and the American avant-garde, right? But that philosophy is really old now. It's out of date. I mean, that was almost 100 years ago. You know, Clement Greenberg's essay came out in, 1939? You know, the essay, avant-garde and kitsch, right?
Yeah.
And so all that stuff is really old and dated. And since then, we've had McEvely's book talking about how the avant-garde is really a Western-centric tradition, and we need to expand out of that. And even after that, we've had this whole explosion of postmodernism, which has completely trashed the theories of the avant-garde. And really expanded the openness of the art world to include things that would have been excluded before.
Which is really what I think art does, is it takes what people say is art and then challenges that. And so I feel like now, you were saying before we started the podcast that these pieces would have been not considered art, but they're so relevant to what painters are doing today. Like, this is what realism or imaginative realism is doing now. And so they are the contemporary pieces. Yeah,
I think what has happened is that since 9/11, I would guess, you've seen a kind of hostility towards avant-garde art, which was hostile, right, and shock art, that kind of stuff. It was repulsive art, the Chapman brothers and things like that. It was kind of revolting, right? And many people didn't want to look at that kind of work, and they wanted to say, okay, well, why do we have to do this? Why can't we look at beautiful things? And so you had this movement, the Atelier movement, that started in the late 20th century, in fact, and that really boomed after 9/11. So you've got a lot of people who are very, very highly trained painters now, and sculptors too, who are firmly back into the traditional techniques of making paintings. And so where do you go from there? Because it's one thing to be extremely highly trained and make a portrait of a person, right? And you see hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them. They're really skilled portraiture, skilled landscape painters. But where do you go from there? And that's where things start getting really interesting, because you get this really imaginative stuff starting to happen. And I think it has a lot to do with the acceptance of fantasy and science fiction films and comic books in the mainstream. That we've seen this because although this kind of art was sidelined, it was still bubbling away beautifully in the 20th century, when with Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and all that stuff, right? Everyone loves those movies. Goodness gracious, they're the most popular movies ever made, probably. So it's not like there isn't this cultural background for imaginative realist painting and sculpture. It's just taken a while for it to be accepted as a valid and important form of making art. And postmodernism's done that for us. I think thank goodness for postmodernism. Because it's opened up art to everything. Everything's equal. Mickey Mouse and Caravaggio.
What would you say is the defined difference between someone who would call themselves a fantasy artist and a imaginative realism?
Probably not that much, except in terms of period.
Okay.
I think that you might have used the term fantasy art in the 20th century when it was something that was used to sort of condemn the people making it. You're not a real artist, you're an illustrator.
Okay.
You're a fantasy artist, right? It's this sneery kind of rude term.
Yeah.
And I think that's over.
Okay.
It's done. It's such an old-fashioned thing that's being said by, black-wearing wearing men standing in corners of dark galleries, smoking gorwas and wearing a beret.
I love the visual.
Right? And it's just such old hat. This is new, it's fresh, and it's young, and people understand it. They can look at these paintings and know where to start. They're people. They're paintings of people doing things. And they might be strange things, and they might be mysterious, but isn't that a wonderful place to start, right? It leads you into this imaginative journey. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
You can really step into the paintings and enter into this world. And I was saying earlier is you really have to spend time with each, because there's so much detail that you can just discover something new as long as you're standing in front of it. I'm really excited about this show.
I am as well.
Can you talk a little bit about the conference that you're doing?
Yeah, the Representational Art Conference. It's called TRAC 2019. It's taking place up at the Crowne Plaza Hotel in Ventura. Starts on Sunday, the 31st, which is tomorrow. We're open to the public. Please do come and participate. You have to buy a day pass. We have some wonderful stuff. Probably the best way to find out about it is to visit the website, of course, which is track2019.org. So I recommend going to see track2019.org for details about it. Keynote speakers every morning. We have Tuesdays a big gallery day, and we're going to visit 4 different shows on Tuesday, which is awesome. We start up at the Carnegie, where they have a show called The Imaginary, and then we come here to see The Illusionist, and then we go over to the university, to Cal Lu, and we see a show at the Quan Phong Gallery there, and then the Roland Gallery, where there's a show of paintings by Rigoberto Gonzalez. Amazing paintings, just vast, great. But the big one is huge, must be 20 feet wide, of a border shooting, and it's from the valley in Rio Grande Valley in Texas. And boy, what a life people are living on the border down there. Just intense. Cartel shootings and police, and you don't know who's on which side. And it doesn't matter what uniform they're wearing, because you've got informers in the cartels, and you've got in the police as well, from each other's side, right? So he's painted a bunch of really intense paintings there, and really worth seeing.
Wow.
That's at the Roland Gallery at CLU.
And this is a conference that happens annually, so if someone's...
Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had 6. This started in 2012, and that was here at the Crowne Plaza again, in Ventura. And we did it 3 times there. Then we went to Florida, and then we went to the Netherlands.
Oh, interesting that it travels.
Oh, yeah, it has traveled. And now back to Ventura.
Awesome. Is there membership opportunities for people to join the conference, or is it day passes and an advisory board? How is it run?
There's a group at Cal Lu who organize it when we're here. We have 4 or 5 people on the committee that organizes things, and there's an awesome group of people: Cindy Keitel, Jeff Miller, Terry Spihar, myself, and Rachel Schmidt. And all of us we have a very good relationship with each other. We get on like a house on fire, and everyone knows what everyone's doing, and it's really nice to have a good team. You've got to have a good team on any enterprise, right? And
Absolutely.
we really have a good team. Super nice people. Mike Adams, of course, he founded the conference with me, but he retired a few years ago. We really miss him. There's a hole.
Yeah.
I love Mike. He's such a great guy.
Cheers to you, Mike.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. That's an awesome opportunity.
So,
Well, the other thing at the conference is not just people giving speeches, right? But we also have some really great demonstrations in the evenings.
Okay.
Yeah, some awesome demonstration stuff. Alicia Ponzio is going to be down here, sculptor, terrific sculptor. She'll be doing some work and demonstrating how to sculpt from imagination, which I can't wait to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she's a figurative sculptor. Sculptor. So, how do you craft a human body that skillfully from mud? right?
Yeah.
It's a miracle. We're looking at Richard MacDonald's sculptures right here. That's called Nightfall. And I just can't believe how these people make things that look so beautiful and so lyrical, right?
Yeah.
And they're poetry in motion, these things, and magical, and they're balanced. I mean, that figure's floating, right?
Yeah.
The only thing holding it up is the drapery that's sort of wrapped around her leg.
Wow.
And it feels like the figure's actually levitating, and he loves to play with that stuff. It's miraculous to me that sculptors can do this. So that's one of the real pleasures of track, is the demonstrations.
That's incredible.
We have Virgil Elliott, who literally wrote the book on traditional oil painting. In fact, if it wasn't for Virgil Elliott, I don't think I'd be painting today, because I got his book in the 1990s, and he literally taught me how to paint in his book, how to use traditional oil painting techniques. And I don't think I'd be doing what I do now if it wasn't for Virgil.
Yeah.
So it's awesome. He's going to come and do a demonstration, and he'll be talking about painting. And we have Tim Jennison as well, who's the famous Tim's Vermeer movie produced by Penn and Teller. Do you remember this movie? It showed you how to produce a Vermeer painting and how Vermeer may have used lenses to create his paintings. Because there's something funny about Vermeer, right? When you look at them, they're too perfect. And so Tim got into the sort of lens theory of what he might have been using. And the interesting thing is, Vermeer lived next door to a lens maker.
Oh, snap. Gotcha.
Okay.
So, he had every access that you could imagine to this new technology. And people get all upset about it because they want to think of Vermeer being this sort of miracle-working, wonderful painter. And the idea of him using technology is like taboo among people who are traditionalists, right? But boy, I got to say, Tim has spent millions of dollars on this. He's filthy rich, right? And he runs a tech company that developed video software. So he's got plenty of money to spend, and he spends it on his favorite thing, which is to explore Vermeer.
Yeah.
So he's done more research on Vermeer than anyone else possibly could have, with huge resources.
Oh, man.
I mean, he built a house where Vermeer probably painted the view of Delft. Right,
wow.
He literally built a house there so that he could put his lens equipment up on this in the right place, looking out of the right spot, and capture the view. Right? It's just mind-boggling.
That's a lot.
I want to be so into something that I have to just do a bunch of research and spend all my money on it. Yeah, I think that's the passion of finding something that you're just so enthralled with is really it's really nice.
Yeah.
All artists have it.
Yeah?
Yep.
What's
painters and sculptors?
Do you have yours?
They're all obsessed with making stuff. They can't stop it. You can't help it. You stop a painter from painting or a sculptor from sculpting, and they become a different animal.
Yeah.
They love to do it.
How? Going back to maybe your background, when did you start painting? And
I was a terrible student at school, and the only place I liked being at school was in the art room, and I just gravitated towards drawing and painting and loved it when I was maybe 14 or 15, I guess, and I loved being in the studio. And so that's where it all started for me, was hating being at school, because I was at this dreadful boarding school and didn't want to be there, and all I wanted to do was escape. So, I suppose you could say that my interest in imaginative realism is this sort of deeply seated sort of escapism, right? I want freedom. Right? But I don't know, that's a bit pop psychology for you. Boarding schools are dreadful, by the way. Don't send your kids to boarding school.
Oh.
It sounds bad.
Were you in boarding school through your entire education up until college?
Yeah, when I was a kid, from 11 till 18.
Wow.
My brother was there even younger. He went to boarding school when he was 9.
Oh,
he was
my goodness.
tiny. He was the smallest kid in the school.
Was he your younger brother?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 years younger than me.
Dang.
And then, so did you go straight to get a bachelor's in art, or?
Like I said, I was a terrible student. And, I did go to art school right after I finished boarding school, and went to a small art and design school. for a year, foundation course, and then looked around at colleges, but I was not a good student and not really interested in applying myself and working hard in the discipline that it actually takes to be an artist, right? I didn't realize. People have this sort of fantasy version of being an artist, which means you hang around and go to parties and have a nice time with your friends in coffee shops, right? That's got nothing to do with being an artist. But being an artist is brutally hard work. You're in the studio by yourself all the time and listening to Led Zeppelin and stuff, but nevertheless by yourself, right? And I realized that actually, if you want to be an artist, you have to do that. You can't be a social butterfly. You have to be serious. You've got to get in the studio and work 24/7 if you can. And so that's the real deal with being an artist. Anyway, so I wasn't good at art school, and it took me a couple of years to just settle down and find myself. And actually, in the 80s, when I was looking at art schools for bachelor's degrees, you couldn't find traditional art. I wanted to be like Caravaggio. I wanted to paint, dramatic, theatrical, spectacular things, not make piles of shoes and wrap bits of string around things, and all that stuff that was going on in the 80s. It was dreary. And so I bailed out of art at that point and went into theatre instead, and did lots of set design and lighting design. Well, think about it. That's Caravaggio. Yeah. Right? On the stage, I could put a spotlight on someone, and there's Caravaggio right there, right? Except moving. It was fantastic. So this sort of theatricality, I think that has a lot to do with this show too, by the way. You look at these, and there's a lot of drama going on. They're like one-image dramas. Right, and that's, I think, the thing I enjoy most about them is that there's this sort of time element that goes into the paintings where you're only seeing one element and it's a frozen moment of time, but that you have to look at the paintings to catch the narrative that's going on and understand what the story is. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the reasons I like these paintings so much, is this prolongation of our experience of them. And paintings are often referred to as being slow art, right? There's slow art.
That is a very new term, I think. We've never heard slow art.
Oh, really? Mm-mm. Oh. Well, so slow art, because they take time to grok in fullness, as Robert Heinlein said. You have to let them seep into you without being impatient with them. They're a gradual development and a gradual understanding, right? For good paintings. And some paintings, you look at them and you're done. Yeah. Right? In fact, quite a lot of paintings. Mm-hmm. Right? So I look for paintings that make me wonder. I think paintings should induce in you a capacity for wonder. Yeah. To make them really worthwhile. And again, so many of these paintings in this show do that. Mm-hmm. Like the Richard MacDonalds I referred to. I just gaze in wonder at Richard MacDonald because he's so good. Yeah. Just the quality, not just the craftsmanship, but the idea, right? The technical qualities of it, of a really good painting. They have to be really well crafted because the technical process leads you beyond the materiality of the painting if they're well crafted. You're right? That's a clunky way of saying it. When they're well made, you don't want to think about how they're made. Right, and then you get sucked into that narrative and the image instead of the quality of the technical mastery of it, right? And then maybe you can step back from it and do that Kantian thing where you're interested in it and disinterested in it, and looking at it from a more objective point of view and considering it more thoughtfully about technique and criticize technique, perhaps, right? But I think your first inclination when you see a painting is nearly always actually sentimental. You look at the painting and you're either in love with it or not, but you have this sentimental reaction, a sensual reaction to it first, and then you have the intellectual reaction to it later. And when you explore the meanings and the narrative of the artist's life or whatever. Mm-hmm.
We were at a show last night, and it was in LA, and it was figurative, and we spent the whole time being hung up on how poorly they were painted. Like, this hand is terrible. Like, we couldn't get into the work, like you were saying, because we were hung up on how poor the technique was. Yeah. So I think you're spot on with that.
I think it's
Absolutely.
important. I do. I think it's a really important part of it. And a lot of people are trying to catch up to the figurative revolution that's been going on, because you've seen so much figurative work pop up recently. Probably, I think, thanks to the pop surrealist movement, Juxtaposed magazine, High Fructose, those kinds of magazines, right? And again, as I said, the fantasy, Lord of the Rings, science fiction, all that stuff. You're seeing that sort of popular culture impact what used to be a different kind of art world. I talk about this a bit in a couple of papers I've written about the bubble bath that we're in now. Postmodernism really makes us into a cultural bubble bath rather than there being a singular art world. Now there are many, many art worlds, right? So that sort of avant-gardist bubble is deflated. And now it's just one bubble amongst many. They don't have that hegemony of power that used to be there in the 20th century. Now you've got multiple bubbles, and all of them have different gatekeepers and different theory and different people commentating and all that. So I think that's very healthy for the moment. I wonder what's going to happen in 30, 50 years.
Yeah. I love that bubble bath idea.
Right. And so you are a writer as well. So what are you working on right now?
Oh, goodness. So many things.
So many.
I've just written an article about this show, which is going to be in American Art Collector magazine in a month or two. So keep your eye open for that. I'm writing 2 books. They keep sort of jumbling with each other. And so it's either one enormous book, which is just way too long, must be 150, 200,000 words by now.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just ridiculously too big. So I think it's actually 2 books. And I think one of them is really about the play of art and power in the 20th century, especially in the 1930s, and how representational art became cast as the art of the enemy in the 20th century, and how the American radical avant-garde became the art of the Free West, right? And how those two things crash into each other under Roosevelt and Hitler and Stalin. So it's a fascinating history, and I don't think it's been written before. We've always had this sort of narrative of the avant-garde just being the natural progression of art history, right? I don't think so. I think that the avant-garde was a very political tool of propaganda that was used by the West to propagandize the East in particular, but also to make sure that Western avant-garde artists and intellectuals saw that they had a place in the West. America was very afraid of losing Europe to the socialists after the Second World War, right? And so by casting avant-garde art as the art of the Free West, they ensured that left-wing Europeans weren't going to go over to the communist side under Stalin. Instead, they would see their place of freedom in the West, and they were able to make their own work. Because in the East, under Stalin, there's no way you can make avant-garde art. It was absolutely forbidden. You'd end up in the gulag or shot in the head if you were an avant-gardist artist under Stalin. And the same thing under Hitler. You were not going to make avant-garde art under Hitler. You were out of the country or dead under Hitler. So there's this clear relationship of art and power and propaganda going on. So that one's nearly finished. The other book is much more a sort of a commentary on 21st century art. And it's what I've been pulling my articles from, because I write in the morning and paint in the afternoon. Ideally, that's my sort of routine when and I teach too. So that's my daily routine, and I love doing all of it. I can't stop.
And you curate shows, and you put on a conference. Do you sleep?
I wake up every day at about 5 o'clock.
Okay. And
go to bed at about 11, something like that.
Oh my goodness. You're doing it all, though.
But I don't do anything else. I have no life. I love doing this. What else am I going to do? I'm in my 50s, for goodness sake. I'm going to die one day. I want to make the best use of my time as I possibly can.
Absolutely.
I love doing this. There's nothing better.
That's incredible.
That's great. So we haven't talked about your work really at all, your paintings.
Right. So my paintings are very big figurative paintings. I would love to have my stuff in this show, but I thought it would be a bit self-serving, so I decided not to. But it would be quite comfortable in this show. I paint these very large allegorical paintings. I'm almost at the end of painting a very big series of 22 paintings, all of them based on tarot cards.
Okay.
That's fascinating. Have I seen those? They weren't at the museum, were they?
Yeah, there were those. Yeah.
Okay.
There's only 2 more to paint, and I've done all 22. So I'm looking forward to finishing that series. They're very big, they're colourful, they're mysterious. I really like them.
Yeah. They really would fit in here, too.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would fit quite nicely. Having said that, I'm in awe of some of the technical prowess of these painters. You look at Pamela Wilson's painting over there, and it's just radiant. Look at that light.
Yeah.
It's like it's glowing off the wall. It's fantastic. Spectacular stuff. So I love to curate shows and get to spend my time with paintings by other artists who I admire because they're just so good. I love it. But so Vince Natale painted an amazing little painting that I'm looking at just over in the center of the room over there, and it's so unusual because he's clearly a brilliant realist painter, but he's made this abstract painting, right? And so you wouldn't find an abstract painter painting this painting, because they wouldn't use the same techniques at all. They would never do that. And I think that's an amazing piece of work because it bridges that space between realism and abstraction so nicely.
Mm-hmm. It's incredible. We will definitely be posting a photo of it.
And then he did another painting over on my left over there, which you can't see because it's around the corner. But it's a wonderful skull that's lying on a bed of red rose petals. And the really interesting thing about that is that it doesn't exist. When you look at it closely, at first you think it's just a skull, right? It's like a rabbit skull or something like that. But then you realize that it doesn't make any sense. There's no creature that ever had a skull like that, and it's actually a skull of a demon of some sort, right? Straight out of a Hieronymus Bosch painting. It's a completely invented thing, but it looks like it's a real skull. And so you get that from a lot of these paintings. You get this sort of shift and sort of being put off balance by them. That you think you know what it is, and then you realize that's not what it is. Mm-hmm. Right, the Brad Kunkle painting that we have here, the nature of history. There's the same kind of thing. You look at it and you think you know what's going on, but then you realize that the swallows that are flying in the air, they're casting a shadow on the background. So there's not the sky, it's a wall. And then you double take because it's also, when you go lower down the painting, it's the sky to this rather lovely natural background. And so these things happen in these paintings that you think you know what's going on, and then you don't. Guy Kinnear paints a bunch of really fabulous stuff like that. You look at his work, and you can see these kind of paper and cloth dolls. And at first you think they're totally fantastic, right? They're imaginary, but they're not. They're real. He's the most realist painter out of all of them, in fact. Which is quite extraordinary too, because he lives out in the woods, 8 miles off of the metalled road on a dirt track, and he doesn't have internet and stuff out there, and so he's painting the actual landscape he lives in, and he makes these props because he doesn't have studio mannequins and doesn't have models, right? So he creates these dolls and paper figures and paints them. So he's the most realistic painter of the lot.
Wow.
But he looks like the weirdest and most fantastic painter of the lot.
That is fascinating.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go back and really look at his piece now that I know that those figures are real created pieces by him.
Yeah, they're fabulously cool.
Can you talk a little bit about your curating experience? Like, I'm sure you get a good amount of pieces from artists, and then do you choose the ones that you think would be good for the overall show?
For this show, what I've done is that I know these artists. I've known them for many years, some of them, I know what I'm looking at, and I know what I'd like to put into the show, deliberately to address this question about how do you make something that's not real look real, right? And so I pay attention to what they've been doing and how they do it, and then kind of marry them all together and think, well, that would work with this and that. And I have actually had some ideas for this show which I didn't follow up on, which is sad because I want to show it all. In my ideal show, I would have paintings like Botticelli in here, and I would have the Lion Man sculpture dating from 30,000 BC in here, and then a sculpture of Batman with it, right? Because one of the things I really want to achieve with this show is to show that this imaginative realism that's happening now has incredibly deep roots, right? From the very beginning of art history, you see imaginative realism happening, and it's never gone away. Hieronymus Bosch, I mentioned earlier on, right? How about Christian icon painting? You see the same kind of detail in the work in Christian icon painting, and the same fanciful stuff going on, people floating. In Baroque paintings, you see paintings rather like Guy Kinnear's paintings here, right? The Assumption of the Virgin Mary. So you've got Virgin Mary floating up into the air, right? And Guy Kinnear is referencing that, and also referencing things like Wonder Woman, when Wonder Woman at the end of the movie is floating up in the air after having defeated the bad guy, right? And it's that same stream, it's this same perennial idea that fantasy and imaginative realism has always been there. It's this long thread that goes way back in time. Gustav Klimt takes icon paintings and brings them into the modernist period, right? And then Pamela Wilson does the same kind of thing and turns it into this image of Baroque excess, except in the 21st century. Right, but they're still all in that same tradition. Kathiucia Dias is painting, same thing. You've got these old legendary ideas. And the same Regina Jacobson. God, I could go through all of them. All of them are in this narrative that goes back centuries. Roger Dean is a traditional landscape painter. Right, he goes around, draws the landscape, and then he says, okay, what if? What if? And isn't that a great question for a painter to ask? Yeah. What if? What if I took this landscape and stretched it? Or what if it happened in a world with no gravity? Right? And so you end up with these wonderful ideas that take what's real and make it become something else, something new.
And a different way to look at a landscape.
Yeah, but still really firmly placed within the narrative of art history. Right? You've still got that long tradition that's there.
That's wonderful. Since we're coming to the end, I wanted to ask you, so you have your series that you said you're almost done working on.
Right.
What next for your work? Where does it go from there?
What next for me? So I want to paint some pagan paintings, I think. I'm not sure. That's a really hard question.
Sorry.
So I'm interested. So technically, one thing, I'm interested in painting big canvases with much more space in them, because I've been painting these big canvases which are quite detailed and busy, lots of stuff going on, and I want to paint paintings which have more air, more room in them, and smaller things happening, but on a very big scale. So I'm quite interested in that. I'm really interested in paintings of the moon and pagan Viking goddesses and that kind of stuff too. But how that forms, I'm not sure. I have sketches of sort of Burning Man punk rock kind of dreadlock people, and they're walking down to the beach and they're carrying bundles of firewood, and there's going to be a sacrifice. Right, and I have some idea of how that's going to take shape, but I need to fully form it. I have to finish the tarot card paintings first.
Yeah,
that's the priority.
Do you have shows lined up for that series to be?
No,
in
not at all. I don't want to at the moment.
Okay.
No, I'm quite happy to. I think after track, I'm going to calm down and quiet down, and paint and write and be quiet.
How long do you be quiet for?
It'll take me a couple of years.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Well, I won't be quiet. I mean, I'll paint and write, but you know what I mean. It won't be as frantic as it is when I'm doing these things. But I need to build a new body of work, and also I need to sell the old body of work too, because I still have quite a few of them that need to move. So I'll be looking for museums and people with some money to take them on.
Mm-hmm. So the artists that we've had on this podcast are kind of at a different level than you, not in a bad way, just more emerging. And so we did want to talk to you about how do you get from being emerging to the level that you're at, where you're showing at museums and I remember your museum show where it then traveled. Like, that's amazing and super impressive for someone who is just emerging and like entering call for entry shows.
Stop doing call for entry shows.
Okay.
Build up a portfolio of a body of work. Do not make individual works of art. Don't think of it like that. Make it so that there's a body of work and that you have 20 or 30 paintings that all make sense together. Don't paint one still life, one landscape, one portrait, a picture of your dog. It's not good enough. You have to be serious about your body of work. Take it seriously. Think of it as a novel, right? Second thing, work your ass off. Do not stop. Do not go to the coffee bar. Turn off your TV and throw it into the trash. You do not need it. And spend all your time in the studio working your ass off. Mm-hmm. Get serious.
That's great. That's perfect. And I think that's what our listeners are interested in hearing.
And what they need to hear.
Yeah. To be, Netflix shouldn't be a thing that you watch. I'm speaking to myself
if
right here.
If you have the self-control, then by all means. But you need to carve out those blocks of time when all you do is paint. And if you have a day job, then you probably don't have time for Netflix, right? Because your priority must be making art if you're going to do this. All the artists I know in this room spend all their time painting. I tell you, they do not go hang out at Starbucks. Richard MacDonald's the hardest working person I've ever met in my life. I've not seen Roger Dean's studio, but I guarantee you it's the same kind of thing. It's very, very focused. He's not messing about. They're professionals. They treat it like this is the thing that's most important to them, and nothing else will get in its way. It's absolutely the priority. Pam Wilson does nothing but paint, to the detriment of other sides of their lives, And if it's important to you to be an artist, then be an artist. Don't fool around. Don't fool yourself, more importantly. Plato says, know thyself. Right? If you're an artist, know what that means. And do it.
Oh, that's super important to hear. If people were trying to find you and your work, where would they go?
They should go to gildedraven.com.
Okay.
And they will find me and my work.
I love that.
Do you do any of the social media, Instagram type of stuff?
I'm on Facebook. I'm really bad at Instagram and the other things. But Facebook I'm on, and you could message me on there if you needed to.
Wonderful. And so would they go to your website to find your writing too, or is that...
No, the writing's all over the place. I guess if they do a Google search, they'll probably find some. But Michael J. Pearce, because there's a movie director called Michael Pearce as well. Damn it.
It's always the worst.
Yeah, so if they do a Google search, Michael J. Pearce art, then they'll probably find something.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Oh, and Tract, of course. They go to the Tract magazine. That's the magazine I edit. And I quite enjoy doing that. It's a lot of fun.
Perfect.
That's part of the Tract website, Tract 2019 website.
Okay, great.
Yeah, tract2019.org.
.org.
And there's a link up there. It says magazine. Just click on that.
Okay.
And there's a few pieces of mine there.
Wonderful. Okay. So just before we wrap up again, the show at Studio Channel Islands will be opening April 6th from 4 to 6. It's called Illusions. It's a free show.
The Illusionist.
The Illusionist. And it's amazing. We'll be taking a few photos and posting them when the show opens on our Instagram, Art World
Podcast.
Gosh darn it. Every single time. thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you.
the time to be on our podcast. It was really interesting.
Really incredible.
My pleasure.
I'm going to have to
Thanks for having me.
re-listen to it just to
I know.
pick up on everything that you said.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.